On June 17th, 2016, an unknown attacker began pulling millions of Ether from the most ambitious project on Ethereum. Roughly 3.6 million ETH moved into a child contract, worth about $60 million at the time. But Ethereum's network had not failed. Every block kept arriving, and every rule was followed exactly. The dangerous part was not that the code disobeyed its instructions. It obeyed instructions nobody understood well enough. Stopping the attacker would require something even more controversial than the exploit: changing Ethereum's shared state by agreement. The vote meant to save one project ultimately left 2 Ethereum chains and one question that crypto still cannot escape. Ethereum's main network was less than a year old when developers tried to build an organization entirely from smart contracts. It was called the DAO, a pooled investment fund designed to operate without a traditional manager or board. People sent Ether to its contracts and received DAO tokens, which gave them voting power over proposed investments. Proposals, votes, and payments were supposed to happen through code, while the shared treasury remained inside the contract. During its 2016 token sale, the DAO collected roughly 12 million Ether, then valued near $150 million. That was a remarkable experiment, and an enormous amount of value resting on software that could not simply be patched. The DAO included a split function so dissenting token holders could leave and create a separate child DAO. When someone split away, the contract sent their share of Ether before fully updating the internal record of their balance. Sending that Ether activated code controlled by the recipient, allowing the recipient's contract to call back into the DAO. That callback re-entered the split function while the original withdrawal was still unfinished, and the old balance still appeared available. The DAO checked the same stale record, saw funds that appeared untouched, and sent another payment to the child contract. The process could repeat recursively, nesting call inside call, before the first execution finally returned and updated the books. On the morning of June 17th, observers noticed Ether flowing repeatedly from the DAO into an attacker-controlled child DAO. Each recursive sequence extracted more Ether, while developers and token holders watched the public chain record the movement in real time. By the end of the main drain, about 3.6 million ETH sat inside the attacker's child DAO. Yet, the child DAO's rules imposed a waiting period of roughly 27 days before those funds could be withdrawn. The delay did not recover anything, but it gave Ethereum's community a narrow window to decide what counted as recovery. Ethereum itself continued validating blocks normally. The vulnerability belonged to the DAO contract, not the network's consensus rules. The theft was not invisible. Every movement was public, permanent, and still useless without control of the rules around it. A group of defenders used related contract mechanisms to move much of the remaining Ether into protective child DAOs. Now both the attacker and the defenders held large pools behind time locks, and the countdown continued for everyone. One option was to do nothing, preserve every executed rule, and accept that the attacker might eventually withdraw the Ether. Another option was a soft fork that would temporarily reject transactions, attempting to release Ether from the affected DAOs. The most invasive option was a hard fork. Introduce a new state transition that moved the DAO funds into recovery. Every path carried a cost: lost funds, altered expectations, technical danger, or a permanent fracture in community consensus. The soft fork proposal initially looked like the narrower fix, because it aimed to freeze withdrawals without rewriting past blocks. Updated mining software let miners signal support by steering the network's block gas limit toward a threshold. Then researchers found that the proposed filter could be abused to force miners into expensive computation without normal payment. Attackers could send specially crafted calls that consumed computation, slowed mining, and threatened legitimate transaction processing. On June 28th, the Ethereum Foundation published a high-severity warning and advised miners not to enable the vulnerable soft fork. The less invasive rescue had created a new denial of service risk. The community's remaining choices became even sharper. The hard fork plan would place an irregular state change at a specific future block and redirect the DAO's ether. Supporters argued that users had funded an investment organization, not knowingly authorized a recursive drain hidden inside faulty logic. Opponents argued that changing the ledger after a loss weakened the very promise that made a blockchain different. For the strictest critics, the contract's executed behavior was the outcome. However different it was from human intention, supporters answered that blockchains are maintained by people, and people can coordinate when software produces a catastrophic result. There was no master switch. Developers could publish software, but miners, exchanges, node operators, and users had to choose it. Ether holders were invited to signal their preference, and the votes cast heavily favored the proposed hard fork. Ethereum clients released fork-compatible versions, and operators decided which rules their machines would follow at the chosen block. On July 20th, 2016, block 19200 activated the irregular state change on the fork chain. The change transferred Ether from the affected DAO contracts into a withdrawal contract designed to return funds to token holders. Earlier blocks were not erased. The new rules changed the state at the fork point and continued from there. DAO token holders could use the recovery contract to exchange their tokens and reclaim Ether on the forked network. At the time of the fork, roughly 85% of mining power was reported on the new rules, but some miners and users rejected the intervention and kept producing blocks under the original state rules. Both networks shared every block before the fork, then recorded different states and transactions after it. The intervention chain retained the Ethereum name. The continuing original state chain became known as Ethereum Classic. Anyone holding Ether before the split now controlled corresponding assets on both networks. Because the histories had been duplicated, that duplication also created replay risks, because a transaction intended for one chain could be repeated on the other. The fork recovered funds on Ethereum, but it did not revive the DAO as the autonomous investment machine its creators imagined. The exploit turned reentrancy from an abstract programming concern into one of smart contract history's defining security lessons. A core defensive pattern is simple to state: update internal state before handing control to an external contract. The incident also showed why huge treasuries, upgrade constraints, emergency controls, and untested code make a dangerous combination. Review, testing, and formal analysis improved, but no audit can convert misunderstood incentives and complexity into certainty. In 2017, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission concluded that the DAO's tokens were securities under federal law. The phrase matters. Ethereum was not hacked. A contract running on Ethereum exposed a flaw in its own logic. But once that contract held a systemically important treasury, its local failure became a crisis for the entire ecosystem. The hard fork did not make the attack disappear. It created a competing answer to what the next valid state should be. Decentralization removed a single commander, but it did not remove politics, persuasion, coordination, or difficult collective decisions. A blockchain is difficult to change because communities coordinate around stable rules, not because human choice has vanished. Ethereum prioritized recovery through social consensus. Ethereum Classic preserved the untouched state. The split made both values visible. The DAO proved that code can be deterministic, transparent, and executed exactly, yet still produce an outcome almost nobody intended. Secure systems need more than correct happy paths. They need limited damage, safe exits, and plans for behavior nobody expected. Blockchains can automate execution, but they cannot automate away every dispute about intent, responsibility, and acceptable intervention. The DAO is gone, but its central question remains. When code causes disaster, who gets to decide what happens next? That is why the DAO hack was more than a theft. It was Ethereum's first constitutional crisis. For more stories where software, money, and human judgment collide, Subscribe to StickChain. Don't panic, just watch.